Okay. Okay. Awesome. Okay. So thank you for Nawaz for having me. Uh, I'm happy to be here. I haven't done this too much, so apologies if I mess up on a bunch of items. So today, like, I want to talk about continuous delivery, and particularly one implementation at a client that has been going on for about 2.5 years. So that's going to be the kind of the focus of today's kind of talk. But a little bit about me. So my background is development. I am still an active programmer, and over the last 2.5 years, I have been at RBC and helping out with their continuous delivery journey. I say it's a journey because it is not complete by any means, and there's lots of room for improvement in what we are doing. But we're on a good path right now, and I get to sleep at night okay based on how all the teams are doing and how healthy they are. I have been an agile coach for the last 2.5, I don't know, give or take 5 years or so. But I am still actively involved in on the development side as well. As I think being part of a continuous delivery implementation almost requires you to be kind of close to what's going on at the code level to really have an impact. So I'm still very close to the programming side of things. Uh, as Nawaz mentioned, I am a huge Raptors and Arsenal fan. I have two websites actually. Arsenalist.com, which if you are an Arsenal supporter, you may have heard of because I post a lot of highlights as the games are going on. And I also founded RaptorsRepublic.com, which is a pretty nice Raptors site which covers the Toronto Raptors, and there they are with their championship credentials. Um, in addition to that, I also have a podcast which I started with three other coaches from the GTA. You probably know them. It's Cheesy, Jeff Morgan, Hino Marks, and Chaba Berechki, who also joined me on this one. So a lot of our thoughts about continuous delivery are reflected there. Each episode is about 15 minutes or so. So it's short and sweet. And if you enjoy podcasts, that's a good that's one that I hope you like. But enough about me. I'll get back to why we're here today, which is the continuous delivery implementation that I'm referring to. And at the highest level, I think this phrase kind of sums it up. We have grown from about 3 teams when I got there to over 33 teams, or close to 33 teams as of today. So the level of scale is quite considerable over the last 2.5 years. And scaling, I find, is not terribly difficult. It's when you scale, what are all the things that you lose when you are scaling? And usually, when you scale, you use the culture that the initial program or organization had. Because as you grow bigger, communication becomes more difficult. There are more people to communicate to. There are different varying technical practices going on. It's very hard to kind of align everybody towards the same goal. But the fact that we have a scale from 3 to 33 teams is not really that impressive, to be honest with you. What makes me more happy is that over time we have not necessarily lost the speed at which we deliver, and we certainly have not lost the quality of the software that we deliver. So if you look at our key metrics like escape defects and some of those quality metrics, they are only going up. And that is something unique, I find, because as you scale, these things, those other metrics tend to kind of go the other way. But in this case, they're holding steady. So I'm just going to assume that we must be doing something right to achieve some of these results. And when we started this journey, there were some very specific goals that we had, and one of them was to be customer centric. And what that's a loaded fancy term, but what it really means to us is that you always try to look at things from the customer perspective, and you always try to think of the customer in every decision sort of you make from a day to day. One anecdote that I always tell teams on the ground is that Amazon has this concept where there's always an empty chair in the room, which represents the customer. So you always kind of go, hey, what does the customer think? So that's a nice little anecdote because it reminds people that we are there to serve our customers, and those customers have obviously in a financial institution, there's a wide variety of customers ranging from private bankers to high wealth clients to your regular day-to-day to people like me. So it's a wide variety, and to make the best products, we have to adopt a customer-centric approach. But what does that? How do you actually do that? That's nice to say. And one of the things that we kind of aligned on early is that we have to learn customer behavior and needs. We cannot make false assumptions about the customer, or if we make assumptions, we have to validate them quickly. Like as an agile coach, I have probably run the marshmallow challenge 200 times overall. And one of the foundational principles in that game is to uncover hidden assumptions. So that concept is very powerful to me because we have hidden assumptions everywhere. If you have a large backlog, that probably means that backlog is full of unvalidated assumptions, and we should treat it with that level of skepticism. So how do you learn customer behavior and needs? You don't assume them. You essentially run experiments in production. And what that really means is that instead of relying on data that necessarily comes strictly from research or interviews or a lot of the techniques that people employ, you try to observe the user sort of in the wild. You actually make your decisions based on data that you collect in production. And we do that. We collect data from production because we want to action it right away. So if we observe something happening in production, we notice that users are skewing a certain way, we want to action that. And to action that, we don't want to wait months till we action that. We want to action that maybe in a week or 2 or 3 days or something like that. And that was the main challenge that we were trying to solve, is that how do you sort of take what you learn in production and implement something right away, so you either fix the problem and get fast feedback from production. And this was really the challenge. How do you get customer feedback quickly? How do you run experiments in production so you learn about your users? And how do you actually put all this together? And I go back to this little tweet, which I read like a year ago. And this was like a motivating factor for me, to be honest, because it was a nice little tweet which says, there's all these backlogs out there that we feel we have to build. And, this Ben Ornstein here goes, what if I just delete the whole thing? Like, would anything of value have been lost? And like our hypothesis was, I don't necessarily think so, because I think that backlog is full of large assumptions that people have made on what they need to build at a future date, which is not necessarily true. And if we just focus on building what we decided to build 2-3 months ago, we're not really listening to the customer, because customer activity is happening now, and we need to pay attention to the customer right now. So this idea of having large backlogs was really antithetical to what we were trying to do. And again, we tried to ask the question, how do you actually again learn from the customer in production? And continuous delivery was a nice little answer. And the official definition from the Humble and Farley book is really this. It's a software development discipline where you build software in such a way that the software can be released to production at any time you want. So whatever software you are building has to be in a releasable state at any point. So if somebody asks you to do a release at this very moment, your answer should be yes, of course I can. The feature I developed yesterday can go to production today, so we can learn from it. Easier said than done, but I want to caveat the sentence with three things, because if you do this, if you somehow get into a position where you complete a story today and deploy it today or tomorrow, or at the very latest tomorrow, people always go, well, what's the benefit of that? Well, the benefit of that is you have significantly reduced your risk, technical risk, product risk, really all across the border. I'll focus on the technical risk because deployments are generally scary for any company. So when you see a bank do 30, 40 deployments a day, it's fairly non-standard. The risk idea comes from if you are deploying things every day, the chances of you deploying large things becomes very small, because you are deploying only the delta of the work that you completed the previous day or what you just completed that day. So your release increment is very, very small. So instead of thinking in large releases, you're thinking in, let's release this one story I just completed a couple of hours ago to production today, and later on, if you complete another story, you can send that to production as well. Believable progress. I think executives like believable progress. There's no opportunity for success theater in continuous delivery, because you are sending things to production right away. There is no fake done. There is no let's deploy things to UAT and let it sit there. So the progress that you report is very, very believable, because your customers are experiencing it. It's not hearsay anymore. And I already mentioned this a couple times, but it is, to me, the gold standard way of getting customer feedback, because you are immediately giving your customer access to the software you just developed, and they will tell you whether you're on the right track or not. And if you Google up continuous delivery, you'll see a lot of these things that I'm talking about. In addition, you'll see a whole array of technical practices and concepts that that kind of form this idea. And I don't want to cover all of them. I've picked 5 that I feel have made this implementation particularly successful. I will focus on those 5, and I hopefully will also give some ideas on how you can kind of start doing similar things in your place if it's applicable to you. So what does continuous delivery kind of mean again? So at the heart of any continuous delivery implementation is the pipeline. Without a pipeline that takes code from a developer's machine all the way to production in an entirely automated manner, it's extremely difficult to do continuous delivery. You really have to set a vision for your team to invest in your pipeline infrastructure, so your build maintenance, all the infrastructure stuff that people generally find sort of unsexy becomes critical in any continuous delivery setup. And in this example that I'm showing you, you have the developer on the left and you have the customer to the right. And every single commit that a developer makes, every single commit that they make goes all the way from their local host computer to production in an automated way. And that includes this little part, which I've highlighted here, which is change requests, which are probably one of the most complicated parts of getting continuous delivery working in a big environment, because there's a lot of approvals and change requests and all these things that happen. But there are ways you can actually embed these into your pipeline. So other than the usual stuff that a pipeline does, this was also embedded as part of it. Another thing that was really successful was the security testing part, because a lot of the times you have your code ready, but it's not deployable yet because maybe some security group needs to do some activities against the code, maybe some pen test or static analysis, or insert your own security flavor of the day. So that was also built into the pipeline. So before I go any further, I do want to emphasize that without a pipeline that actually takes that verifies that the code you are committing is production grade, this endeavor becomes sort of difficult. And this investment was something that we started on day 1, because we realized without an automated process that takes developer code from their Mac laptop to your production environments is the biggest challenge that we have from a technical perspective. So our current setup is either every commit a developer makes goes to production immediately, or we bundle a day's worth of commits and send it to production the next day. So it's like a daily release we do based on whatever any developer in the program did. So when you're thinking about scale, I mentioned 33 teams. You can kind of go 33 times 10 approximately as the number of people in this program. And none of these concepts that I'm talking about are something that that are foreign. A lot of these are motivated by the work that Jez Humble and Gene Kim have done about in Accelerate. For those of you who don't know the Accelerate book or the Dora project, It is a research product, a research project. It actually is a peer-reviewed paper published. I believe Nicole got her PhD out of this. So what they did was they interviewed, I believe, like 20,000 different companies, or thousands and thousands of companies, did a lot of analysis on what they were reporting. Its summary is in the DevOps report, which I have shown there. But at the end of the day, it came down to just this. It came down to teams that deploy very, very frequently and have very low lead time. So your time from code commit to production is very short. Those teams are the ones that kill it when it comes to software delivery performance, organizational performance, and most importantly, psychological safety. They're actually happy. So this was a very, almost like an ass backwards concept for me, because you usually think the converse is true. You think like, in order, you need to be good at software delivery so that you can deploy more frequently, so that you can deploy faster. But in reality, it's more helpful to think of it the other way around. Is if you want to optimize for something, optimize for getting your code to production as frequently as possible and reducing your commit to production time. And if you do these two things, a lot of other good things will kind of happen automagically. Of course, effort is required, but it really boils down to these two powerful concepts, which when I first investigated them, they were surprising to me because I had not necessarily thought of it in this way. I had thought of it, I was thinking maybe you need to be really good at development in order to do high deployment frequencies, when in reality, it's the other way around. And there's not just this. There's a lot more in DORA, which talks about how these how optimizing for these two metrics helps things. I won't go into too much detail. And actually, instead of 2 metrics, there are 4 metrics that DORA focuses on that we have adopted. And I mentioned 2 of them, which is deployment frequency and lead time for changes. And you notice that elite organizations like the Netflixes, the Facebooks of the day, they deploy multiple times a day. We're talking hundreds of times a day. And the lead time for changes, meaning how long the time between a developer making a change and that change being available to your customer, for them it's minutes. For us in my context, it's hours. But this table sort of summarizes how optimizing for a few key metrics can have a drastic impact on your overall software delivery performance, and also how healthy and happy your teams are. So all this to say that our goal is to get all changes to production as safely, quickly, and sustainably as possible. And I think this slide essentially is the goal of continuous delivery. And now I will speak to 5 different aspects that allowed us to kind of reach this goal. The first, and I believe it's one of the most powerful concepts, even though it's so simple, is to separate and decouple the idea of deployment from release, because the two are often intermingled and cause a degree of confusion, which I believe leads to a lot of waste. And what I specifically mean by this is that even though we have code that is incomplete or code that is not fully done, we should be able to commit that code into our main line of development, our trunk, so that it can immediately be shipped to production. On the on the left, you'll see what happens when developers adopt some sort of model where they have a branch for each requirement they're writing, a branch for each story. What results in this situation is that you have a lot of branches, and there's a lot of merge risk when people are working together at the same time. Because branching is easy, but merging is extremely difficult and extremely risky. And this was the fundamental risk that we wanted to get rid of. Because we firmly believe that if your source code management looked what's on the left, we're doomed. We're not going to meet any of our goals, because developers will spend 50% of the day figuring out where the real code is and how to get their change into the main line. What feature toggles allows us to do, it allows us to turn off parts of the app which are not yet complete so that developers are still able to commit to the main line, and their Git setup sort of looks like what's on the right. So you have a feature branch, and immediately after a few hours at the most, you merge that feature branch into your main line, and you never end up in a situation where you have to ask another developer, hey, can I have your change in my branch so that I can test it and make sure it works so that I can merge your change and my change into the main line? Those were the types of conversations that were happening early in the program. And by any definition of waste, that was a nightmare. Like releases used to take, releasing something was like an activity. Like you had to like have a plan on how to release anything. So adding the idea of feature toggles, which basically goes, deploy all you want, and we will turn the feature on in production at the click of a button, was very powerful because it allowed really people to deploy small increments of things into production very, very frequently, and allowed our source code to be manageable. There's a lot of benefits to feature toggles from a product perspective as well. If you're a product owner on the call, maybe some things are, some bells are ringing. We did use some tooling around this. Launch Darkly, CloudBees, and Tapalytics are three of the tools that we looked at. Tapalytics is the one that we went with. But really the main point of this slide is that trunk-based development, which is not having a lot of story branches and going directly into trunk frequently and very often, saved us a ton of time, and really just, and the developers were happy with it. So it was a huge win for us. The second thing that equally important, by the way, all these 5 things I picked from many, so these are my 5 most important things. Maybe another coach at the program might think differently. So traditionally, we've thought about the pipeline as something like this. You have this team, and I've purposely called it the DevOps team, which manages the pipeline, and there are teams which use this pipeline. So teams use the pipeline to deploy their code to some environment, and there's a different team that is managing the actual pipeline. Like if you're a project manager and you're trying to plan out something, you probably have a line item there which says, oh, I need like 4 DevOps resources as part of this project. And we saw this as a bit of a problem, because we believe that developers are the one that know best how their code should go to production, how best to test and deploy their code. And we wanted to flip it around. We did not want a centralized team to manage the pipeline. We wanted the developers to contribute to the pipeline. We did not want a separate, if we wanted, say, a particular repo to be built a certain way, we didn't want to create a dependency on an external team to make that change to the pipeline. We wanted to empower the developers to go themselves in, go into the pipeline, go into Jenkins, go into these tools, write the code. They're developers. They already know how to write the code. So it was just a question of supporting and coaching the developers on what some of the toolkits available to them are in the pipeline. And as soon as we did that, as soon as we, what I call, democratized the pipeline, we noticed developers making a ton of commits and a ton of changes to the actual pipeline. So if there was a team that wanted to run maybe a linter before they send something, or run an extra security scan to do something, or do whatever they wanted, they now were not dependent on anybody. They had the power to go in there, make changes to the pipeline, and really take ownership and responsibility on taking their code all the way to production. Because before, I thought they always had an excuse. Hey, we can't do it because this thing is managed by an external team. I personally, when I heard that, I cringed at it. And this change that we made had a significant impact on developer health, developer quality, developer way of life, really, because now we empowered them to actually take their software, not just to UAT. Anybody can take their software to UAT. How to take it from UAT all the way to production. And this little tweak did the job for us. And we're continuing to evolve this, but we firmly believe that the pipeline should be treated just as any other code you write to deliver a business feature. If you treat the pipeline as something which is somebody else's problem, that's a limiting factor to how how great your team can really be. So bringing that pipeline code in and exposing that to the developers and coaching developers on how to work with pipelines was a fundamental reason why we were able to scale. The third is limiting WIP. And I think about, we started doing Scrum and we were doing it really, really poorly, like really, really poorly. Sprint commitments weren't being met. People were kind of lackadaisical on, hey, I completed like 30% of my stories. Let's just roll it over to the next sprint. And that happened for about a few months until we realized that there's waste everywhere here. We have too many stories in progress. We have too many not done items. There's just too many things people are working on, and that's you're running into almost like a traffic jam effect where you have a ton of cars on the road and none of them are moving, versus if you have like an empty highway and the cars that are there are actually moving. But let me be specific about what I mean by WIP. I kind of talked about source code branches when I was talking about feature toggles, but a lot of these things were considered WIP. We noticed that there was a lot of designs that people had created which weren't going to be implemented for 6-8 weeks, but yet designers were spending time on that. There was research being done by people that was like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 months out, which people were investing time in now. So, and there were a ton, the backlog was getting bigger and bigger. There were like 200, 300 items in the backlog, which were somewhat planned. So we kind of came up with this idea that we should just only have a backlog, which is 2 times your throughput. So if as a developer, by the way, we also switched to Kanban in all of this, but I'll skip that part. But one change that we made was that you're only allowed to have a backlog which is 2 times how many things you deliver in a week. So if your throughput for the week is 6 stories or 6 whatever items, guess what? You can't have more than 12 items in your backlog. And that's all you can work on. So if you complete 10 stories in a week, your backlog can no longer be more than 10 times 2, which is 20. So what that allowed us to do was it brought everybody to focus on the here and now. So people started focusing on things that are actually in progress, things that are actually important right now, and everybody kind of dedicated to getting things done that were in progress and not worry about things that are so far down the road that even planning for them is a folly. And again, these are not new concepts by any means. I think these have been hammered home in many books written by very, very smart people. So it was very easy coaching people around these ideas, because there were, as I said, smarter people who had done this, and I could present their ideas as, look, these are people that have done this in the past and have been successful, and credit to the teams, they were very receptive to it and kind of took on this idea. And now we have WIP limits everywhere. We have WIP limits for in-progress work, for number of stories in the backlog. My favorite WIP limit by far is if a team identifies 3 different opportunities for improvement, they immediately have a retrospective. They don't wait for their whatever weekly or bi-weekly retrospective. Your WIP hit 3, stop everything, let's go and let's deal with these 3 items and leave everything to the side. So WIP was a very powerful concept. Another important kind of element to this was, I kind of talked about batch sizes, but Little's Law, and really convincing people that if you actually do less, you'll accomplish more. It's such a counterintuitive thought that it took some while to hammer home. And frankly, even there are still teams that haven't really bought into that idea, but there are more that have. So if you actually reduce the amount of things you are working on at the same time, overall, you're going to get things done faster. And that message of working in small batches and not working on too many things at the same time was critical. And you can actually bump this up a level and go beyond the teams to the leadership team, to the VP level. This was a message that we've really tried to hammer home everywhere because it's applicable everywhere. It's not a technical concept. It is a fundamental life concept, really, is to focus on a few things, but do them really well instead of doing a lot of things and do them poorly. And the fourth thing that I kind of want to talk about before I want to open up for questions is, or fourth and fifth, I should say, is fake done. Fake done to me is, hey, we have a Kanban board, to do, doing, done. Oh, what does done mean? Oh, done means that the code is an IST. Well, you still have more activities to do against this feature, so why are we calling it done? And one thing that we did across the board, every team, all 30 plus teams, was we stopped calling things done until they were in production. And this was such a simple and powerful concept because you immediately visualized all the things that were not done, all the things that you had kind of checked out and said, oh, it's somebody else's problem, let them deal with it, let the release team deal with it, let the security team deal with it, let the audit team deal with it, suddenly came under your purview. And when I say your purview, I mean the team's purview. And your Kanban boards looked a lot different because suddenly all the things that you were calling done before were not done at all. And it meant that the team had to invest time in getting them done. So again, not a technical idea, not anything fancy, but just this simple visualization of being honest with yourself and not calling things that are incomplete complete really changed the way teams behaved and how teams interacted with each other and how teams prioritize things. And one of the things that we always say in every team is that the stuff on the board that's on the right is more important than the stuff that's on the left, because the stuff on the right is closer to go to production. And if you want to optimize for your lead time, which is one of the two metrics that I mentioned earlier, you better focus on the things that are on the right side of the board, not the left, because we're optimizing for lead time. And getting that idea into everybody's head that we are not optimizing for how many things we're working on at the same time. We're optimizing for how fast it takes us to go from commit to production and how frequently we're able to deploy. This change in our Kanban boards immediately brought all those things to light and really changed a lot of behavior. And fifth thing that I picked from was this sort of idea. And I think what you see on the screen there is maybe a traditional, not even traditional. I think a lot of Scrum teams follow a similar approach like this, where you have some sort of a roadmap. It's really a Gantt chart, but they call it a roadmap so that they avoid saying the word Gantt chart. Is you have a roadmap with a bunch of dates on it. And this usually is dumped on to the product owner and business analyst. And those guys hammer away stories. Developer takes those stories. Developer writes software. Software is tested by a QA person, or maybe even the PO or BA often, who kind of say, oh, okay, it's good to go. And then they pass it on to the release team, and the release team sends it to production. In this setup, which is kind of what we had on day one, we immediately identified two main problems. The first problem is that there are like 4 handoffs here. And if you're familiar with any agile waste model or any of that, you know that handoffs is one of the reasons why everything blows up. There's miscommunication, there's delays, there's a lot of bad things that are just associated with handoffs. And we really wanted to reduce these. The second problem that we saw with this approach was this idea of quality being the responsibility of a particular role. Because if we write software and then we hand it off to somebody else who will validate them at their own time, who has their own priorities that they're working against, you sort of end up in this situation where the priority that the product owner has set isn't even being followed because people are working off different queues. And we didn't like the idea of quality being the responsibility of the QA person or the product owner to verify to make sure things are working. We wanted to shift away from it while also reducing handoffs. So kind of what we did, and I couldn't draw a great diagram for this one, but this is the best one I could come up with, is you have the POBA who present a business problem, and you have a developer who is actively having a discussion with the PO and BA about a particular problem that exists. And it is the developer who writes the stories that go on our Kanban board. Because the idea here is that stories exist so that developers can sort of understand the work, break down the problem into manageable chunks, and then release them, and then work on them. What was happening was that the product owner was writing a lot of the stories and kind of dumping it over the fence to the developer, and there was a lot of waste in that idea. So what we did was we said, hey, product owner, business analyst, you guys have a wealth of domain knowledge that exists in your brains. Focus on educating and informing the team on what some of the business problems that we deal with on a day-to-day basis are. Because what that also does is it also changes the mode of communication between business and developers. So instead of communicating through user stories, we saw an uptick in face-to-face communication, and a lot of the other good stuff that people talk about. And developers were proficient at writing stories. Our BAs were supportive of it. Our BAs coached our developers. Our BAs are frankly like very impressive overall when you deal with them. But the coaching that our BAs provided to our developers was really helpful in the developers learning to write stories that they understood. And developers created great stories. They were small, they were manageable, you could execute on them. And that was one change. And what you'll notice here is that there is no QA. We essentially have taken the approach that the responsibility of quality resides on the team, specifically the developer. And it is the developer's responsibility to certify the code that they are writing, not give it to somebody else who will verify it. Obviously, this idea was pretty, controversial, really, in many circles. But as soon as you tried this and the developers kind of accepted this reality, they were excited by it. And now if you look at our developers, they are operating without any QA across any of those teams that I mentioned earlier. I think there's a couple teams that have QA people on there, but 95% of them don't have any QA presence, because it is the developer that looks at the business problem, validates it, writes the automated test suite, and also is responsible, as I earlier said, for releasing it. This required a lot of coaching. It was not a smooth ride by any means. But one thing that was really helpful was Elizabeth Hendrickson's book, Exploratory Testing, which provides a very, very good technique on how the team can own quality instead of an individual. This book, I will say, was like one of the, it really, even though it's not saying anything, like when you read it, you're like, of course, we all do this. But some of the techniques outlined in that book on how to actually do exploratory testing, how to engage the team, how to think about testing differently, was fundamental in the developer mind shift. And so credit for Elizabeth for writing that fantastic book. So earlier, we talked about a lot of the different things within continuous delivery. I focused only on 5. There's also a lot of other stuff I can focus on, maybe in a future session or something like that. But these are the 5 that I thought had a very high impact in our implementation. Feature toggles, feature toggles which help create nice branches and allow the separation of deployment and release. Pipeline democracy. So a central team does not manage your pipeline. The developers that write the features manage the pipeline. Limiting work in process, not calling things that are not in production done, and a team owning the quality, not a particular role, because that's how you reduce handoffs. And handoffs are one of the main reasons which prohibit the 2 metrics of lead time and deployment frequency that I mentioned earlier. I believe we have only 10 minutes for questions, or 7 minutes for questions. but I'm hoping that I covered some of the key basics, some of the key points that I wanted to. Nawaz, I'll open it up for any questions. I can go back and forth, anything you like.
Thanks, Zarar. Yeah, I think we do have a few, and uh, we would try to get to as many as we can in this time that we have. Uh, so let me go to the chat window. I think there was, yeah, I think the first question in the chat window came from Paul. Uh, you did mention scaling from a team of 3 to 33. Out of curiosity, is there a specific scaling agile framework adopted by the enterprise? That is first part of the question. And the second is, do you decouple release from demand in your organization?
The first question is no. That was a conscious decision that we made not to use a scaling framework because the scale, and I'm not, so please do not take this as knocking scaling frameworks. I'm just giving you what our thinking was. Uh, Scaling frameworks were too prescriptive for our liking. They almost told you what the end state should be. And when we looked at some of the end states that were described in less and safe, they were not desirable to us, and they just weren't desirable to us. It seemed very, very process heavy. So we researched them briefly, but we discarded them fairly quickly. Your second question, no, yes, we decoupled release from demand. Is that because we don't really care about demand? If there is any sort of code written, that better be going to production as fast as possible. It doesn't matter if that code is a small bug fix or a little bit of refactoring or some improvement. It goes to production. If somebody decides to add something to the backlog which they need right now, the PO prioritizes just like they do in every team, and that will get shipped within 2 to 3 days or what have you. So we decoupled it in a sense that we don't even necessarily care about demand. We just, whatever the PO has prioritized, we ship out.
I hope it answered his question. The next one is from, I apologize in advance if I do not pronounce your name right, Aris or Aris. Uh, the question is, how does developer skill sets play a role in continuous delivery, given not every developer has the same experience and skill to develop releasable code right off the bat?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's if you all developers, I'd say on the team follow the normal distribution, right? There are great developers, there are junior developers, there are developers of all kinds of sorts. So the reason I say it's a great question is because that it opened the door for us to kind of at the start of the program, and still we still encourage this all the time. Is that two concepts? One, default pairing. If you are on a team where you have this distribution that the person who asked the question described, you actually don't pick up a story on your own. You always pair with a junior developer, and that helps grow. So almost like in the morning stand up, we have a pairing schedule which says you're pairing with him, you're pairing with her, and blah blah blah. And that's organized based on their skill set, their maturity. So that helps upskill developers a lot. Also, we found specialization being a problem because we have this idea of a front end developer and a back end developer, and there's almost like an internal team handoff between the two. I did my part, now you do your part. So we focused a lot on two techniques, mobbing and pairing, to kind of break that down and really upskill our back end developers to learn more JavaScript technologies and vice versa as well. So to answer your question, heavy use of mobbing and heavy use of pairing, and almost pairing by default in a lot of teams where you have a lot of junior developers and you have like maybe only a few strong developers.
Great. I think the next one is from May, and I believe it has two parts. And you did answer the second part of the question. So I would go to the first one. How do you keep the master branch clean when everyone commits to it frequently?
Well, the pipeline will reject anything that is not clean. So there's a lot of tooling built into the pipeline which will not merge the code if it does not have a lot of different thresholds. So, for example, mutation testing should be like upwards of 90%. Your end-to-end test should pass. Your sonar metric should be green all the way. And just because there's a lot of commits into master does not mean master is dirty. As long as the commits are undergoing the pipeline thing that I discussed earlier, that's fine. You can commit to master 1,000 times a day, as long as the code that is being merged into master is being certified by the pipeline in oh crap in that diagram that I had earlier. It's all good. So we don't really care how much master is committed to, as long as it follows this process.
Great. Uh, Let me see if there is another one. Okay, these are all comments. So let me go scroll up a little bit. I think we have a minute, so I can try to get to the. Yeah, I think this is May again. The feature toggling is based on the assumption of proper decoupling. How do you do it when it is inherently not possible? I am talking in a broader sense of projects.
I need to understand that question more, because I this feature toggling. Why would it not be possible? I mean, maybe maybe give me an example where you think it might not work.
Is May online? I don't
Uh,
know that. Oh yeah.
yeah. For example, in my company, we're working on microcontrollers. Sometimes when you're working on microcontrollers, you cannot decouple features. Like there are multiple things that are accessing the same resource, and it's not possible because of the optimization and the limitations we have. Like we have 128 kilobytes of RAM. There's a lot of optimization, and because of that, we cannot decouple a bunch of stuff from each other. It's going to be very hard to implement this method there.
If you say so. I mean, I agree with you. I mean, you know your context better. I mean, if you only have 128 KB of RAM, you described. Um, I mean, at the end of the day, a feature toggle is just an if and an else condition. It's a fancy way of putting an if else in there. Um, I think you're working on some pretty, I think, low level hardware stuff. I am not an expert at that, so I cannot tell you if it's possible there. But theoretically, all a feature toggle is doing is saying, if this condition is true, enable this API, and if it's not true, enable this API, or show this to the user if it's closed, show this to the user if it's not. I'll take your word and believe it that it's not possible in the environment, but in most cases where you have your traditional stack of a web and a backend, it's fairly easy to do. Sorry for not answering your question, but that's the best I can do.
Great. I think we almost ran out of time now. I think there are still maybe a couple of that we could not get to. Is it okay maybe if these people can be able to contact you? I believe you have left your your details
Yeah,
on the slide. Yeah.
yeah, and if there are more questions or whatever, I can stay on for a little bit more.
If the people who want to get their answers, yeah, I don't mind staying back a little bit as well. Okay, I think so. Let's go to what is the question
I
there.
just want to say thank you, Zarar.
You're welcome. Thank you. Hopefully it was
That's
helpful.
awesome. That was an awesome presentation. Thank you.
Okay, this is a really so this will come to me in a direct message. So I don't know if the person is on the call is on this webinar or not. How would you approach a situation where an extensive backlog has been built, but there has been no framework in place to refine or prioritize? There was no prior product management ownership. So this is coming from hell, I guess. Stakeholder input is coming at different levels, and the development teams is frozen in addressing this feedback in order to make improvements to the existing product. Would you recommend starting a backlog from scratch? Okay, this is where the crux of the question is.
Well, I think, as I said, I mean, for everything I'm saying, you need executive support. These things don't just happen magically, right? So if you have a large backlog, I mean, ask the person who created those things, if they're still available, when they actually plan on working on story number 38. Because I think so. Okay, let me answer this way. I think one of the most powerful retrospectives that I have done is around software wastes. And I think getting your team in a room and running a waste retrospective, like the 7 lean wastes that people talk about, running that retrospective and opening the floor to your team and asking them, what do you think? Do you think our team is subscribing to some of these wastes? Do these wastes exist on our team? And it'll be very difficult for them to say no to that. I mean, you can go ahead and you can, yell and scream at the team, go, this is the backlog is too big, this is too that. It's not going to make a lick of a difference, because at some point the team themselves have to realize that they're on a path to nowhere. So as a coach, I would not tell the team anything. I would run some sort of a retrospective. The waste one is a really good one that I know. And hopefully that triggers something within your team that goes, oh my God, this backlog is full of very likely false assumptions and it's outdated. It's like stale cheese.
Okay, I'm not sure if the person is still on the
Yes,
call.
thank you for that feedback.
Okay, there he is. Great. There is one more from May. How does major refactoring fits into small deployments?
Great question. Very good. I think that should have been part of my talk. There are no major refactorings. So we had some major refactorings early on, and they were a disaster, a complete disaster. It was like, hey, this will take me 2 days. It took like 3 weeks, and it still wasn't done. And ironically, the refactoring left things worse than it were before. So, and this is one of the byproducts of continuous delivery, is that because a developer knows that whatever code they are committing is going to production within the same day or at most the next day, they will change how they understand refactoring. You will not see a 40 file PR which does some crazy refactoring, because the developer doesn't want to be held accountable. Before you had QA there who they used to do the change and they relied on QA to fix the bugs. Now, when you shift that responsibility over to the developers, suddenly they're like, oh man, I don't want to commit crap code and break the app in production. So they internally change the way they think about refactoring. Now, I did spend a considerable amount of time going through the Martin Fowler text and talking about small refactorings and a lot of the patterns that he talks about in the Red Book. And we coach the developers to not actually do large refactorings and do refactorings, and also do refactorings that are automated. Do not do manual refactorings that can cause bugs. Use the tool set provided to you by IntelliJ, which is obviously a powerful IDE, and WebStorm and some of these tools, and maximize their toolkit to do your refactoring. And the combination of daily deployments, sending the code to production, the developer kind of taking on more responsibility, automated refactoring, we naturally saw big refactorings, big redesigns really go all the way down. And now the refactorings are like small, they're 5-6 files here and there.
Great. I think, yeah, I believe you answer his question. I think that's what all I can see in the chat window. Unless someone else want to ask something, you can unmute yourself and maybe ask Zarar while he's here.
I have a question.
Yep.
Okay. Zara, I just want to say thank you so much for this webinar. It was really amazing, very eye-opening. I have a Scrum Master who is in the company that I'm working at, and she has some difficulties one of our difficulties is to get the team to come to the stand up, and another one is to get the team to update the Jira board. And it has been frustrating to her. And I'm trying to put something together for her to coach her so that she'll be able to let them take responsibilities of their work as a team.
Well, I think whenever you see that situation, I mean, if the team is not attending the stand up or updating their board, they probably don't find any value in the stand up, and they probably think the board is full of lies. So I think this is not. I don't think this is a scrum. I think if you have to coach that scrum master, what I would advise you is for the scrum master to ask the team if they find their current ceremonies valuable, and that scrum master be open to changing their mind based on what he or she hears. Because the team has already spoken. The team has spoken actually loudly. The team has spoken with their actions, which is much more louder than with words. So there's clearly a value mismatch where your scrum master thinks the stand-up is more valuable than what the team members think the stand-up is. The idea, I would rephrase your problem and say, what is the best way for the team to spend 9 o'clock in the morning? And maybe the team can devise their own stand-up routine. Whatever it takes to get the stand-up to be more meaningful, I would ask the team, what would make the stand-up more meaningful, and follow that thread and see where that leads you, rather than trying to almost like convince the team that the stand-up is useful.
Thank you. That was great. Thank you.
Hey, Zarar, I have a question to Reese. You mentioned Little's Law. Is it something that you guys are practically using on your with your teams for managing whips?
So Little's Law, I don't have like an Excel file where I like compute Little's Law all the time. I use Little's Law mostly to basically illustrate to the teams that lower whip equals faster cycle time. That's the point that I use to illustrate it. And it always helps when the theory matches the practice. So we ran a couple of experiments with a couple of teams where we actually tracked Little's Law for like, this happened about almost pre-COVID. And it was pre-COVID. And we ran it for about 6 weeks where we actually tracked our whip. So we had single piece flow. So in your in progress column, there was only one item allowed. And people were like, hey, let's try it out. Let's experiment. That's the theme here. We try new things, you know. So they tried it out, and they, lo and behold, they noticed that their average cycle time increased. So it kind of convinced them to do that, and they kind of stuck with it. But do I go there and I compute Little's Law on a consistent basis? No, I don't. It's more of a communication tool.
And just to follow up with that, you mentioned that the backlog should not be twice the throughput, right? And as a coach, we generally preach that we need at least a 3 to 4 month rolling backlog to our teams. So isn't that a bit? I don't like. I'm just trying to understand the concept. Is it more on the sprint backlog or the Kanban to-do column that you're talking about 2 times throughput, or what?
Specifically, I'm talking about. Well, first of all, I don't know if a 2 to 3 month backlog is consistent with continuous delivery, because as I said earlier, you're trying to get data from production, and if data from production says you should be doing something like X, well then guess what? X takes priority over everything you had in the backlog anyway, so it's moot. Now, regarding the whip limit specifically, that whip limit is applied to. So if you complete 8 stories a week, we make sure that you only have 16 stories that you refine in your backlog. Like refined items are 16. Now, there are people who throw crap into the backlog, which the team just ignores. But for some reason, like having things in the backlog has this therapeutic quality, which I did not know existed. people feel really good that their stuff is in the backlog, even though nobody's working on it or nobody has any intention to work on it. So we allow that just for people to feel good about themselves for some reason. But the actual backlog that the actual team is looking at and opening and clicking on is no more than 16.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I guess that's it for today. I think so. I really appreciate everyone staying back, and special thank to our speaker Zarar. Thanks for making time and then going beyond that allotted time. So I think it was a really good session. I think everyone benefited. Myself, I was taking notes while Zarar was sharing those ideas. So yeah, good takeaways, I guess, for everyone. So thanks, Zarar, one more time.
Thank you for having me.
And yeah, thanks everyone, and have a good rest of the weekend, and we'll see you again back in Feb.